All right, so we're diving deep on standard deviation today, and I'm betting you're here because you've got some questions.
Oh, yeah,
Like, what even is standard deviation?
absolutely.
Or like, how do I calculate it? Maybe even, why should I care about standard deviation in the first place?
Yeah, those are really common questions, and we're going to break it down for you.
Perfect. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, imagine you're looking at a bunch of different data points, like the prices of different stocks,
Okay.
or even the heights of students in a class.
Uh-huh.
Standard deviation basically tells you how spread out those data points are from the average.
Okay, so a big spread means a high standard deviation.
Exactly.
And a small spread means a low standard deviation.
Exactly. It's like the difference between a group of marathon runners who all finish around the same time versus a group of people just randomly jogging.
Yeah.
Some fast, some slow.
Okay.
The marathoners would have a low standard deviation because their times are clustered together, while the casual joggers would have a higher one.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually go from a bunch of numbers to this single number, the standard deviation?
That's where the calculation comes in, but honestly, the concept is more important than the formula itself.
Right.
Just remember, it all comes down to how far each data point is from the average,
Okay.
and then how much those distances vary.
Okay.
The more spread out the data, the higher the standard deviation.
So not just about whether the numbers are big or small, it's about how much they differ from each other.
Precisely. A stock that jumps up and down in price every day might have a higher standard deviation than a stock that slowly and steadily increases, even if their average prices are similar.
And that's why standard deviation is so important in finance, right? Investors want to know how much a stock's price might swing.
Absolutely. Standard deviation is a key measure of volatility. A high standard deviation can signal a riskier investment.
But isn't standard deviation useful in other areas too?
Definitely. Imagine a factory that produces screws. They need each screw to be pretty much the same size.
Right.
A high standard deviation in the screw lengths would mean inconsistent quality control.
So standard deviation helps us see how much things vary,
Yeah,
whether it's stock prices, screw lengths, or anything else.
you got it. It helps us understand the spread of data, and that's useful in a surprisingly wide range of situations.
This is really interesting. So we've got a handle on what standard deviation IRS, but how does this actually play out in real-world examples? Let's talk about that more in part 2 of this deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive on standard deviation.
I'm starting to see how useful understanding variability can be, but I'm curious, are there times when a higher standard deviation might actually be a good thing?
Oh, that's a great question.
It sounds like we've been focusing on how it often indicates risk.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of times people see high standard deviation and immediately think danger,
Yeah.
but it really depends on your goals.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Okay.
Give me an example.
Let's say you're a scientist testing a new drug.
Yeah.
You might want to see a larger spread in the results, meaning a higher standard deviation.
Why would that be a good thing? Wouldn't that mean the drug is unpredictable?
Not necessarily. It could mean that the drug is highly effective for some people and less so for others.
Okay.
This could lead to the development of personalized medicine where treatment is tailored to individual patients.
So in that case, a higher standard deviation could actually point to a breakthrough.
Exactly. It's all about context.
Wow.
Another example.
Go
Let's
on.
say you're a venture capitalist looking at different startups to invest in.
You'd probably be looking for the next big thing, the company that's going to disrupt the market.
Right. And those companies often have high standard deviations in their early growth stages. They're taking risks, trying new things, and the outcomes can be unpredictable.
So a high standard deviation could be a sign of innovation and potential for explosive growth.
Absolutely. Of course, it could also mean they're about to crash and burn, but that's the nature of high-risk, high-reward ventures. The key is to look beyond just the standard deviation and really understand what's driving that variability.
That's a really important point. It's like anything in life, you can't rely on just one number to tell the whole story.
Exactly. Standard deviation give you valuable information,
Right.
but it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
You need to consider the bigger picture, the specific situation, and your own goals.
This is starting to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So besides finance and scientific research, where else do we see standard deviation popping up?
Oh, it's everywhere. Let's say you're a teacher trying to understand how your students are performing on a test.
Okay.
Standard deviation can tell you how spread out their scores are.
So a low standard deviation means everyone's scored pretty similarly, and a high standard deviation means there's a big gap between the highest and lowest scores.
Right. And that can be helpful in figuring out if there are students who need extra help
Right.
or if you need to adjust your teaching methods.
It could even help you see if the test itself is well designed right. If the questions are too easy or too hard, you might see a weird standard deviation.
Exactly. It's a way to assess the variability, not just in the data itself, but also in the process that generated the data.
That's really clever. I'm starting to see how understanding standard deviation can help you make better decisions in all sorts of situations.
Absolutely. It helps you quantify uncertainty and make more informed choices, whether you're investing in the stock market, running a business, or even just trying to understand a set of data.
This deep dive is really opening my eyes to the power of standard deviation. But I'm also starting to realize that there's a lot more to it than just plugging numbers into a formula. It's about understanding what that number actually means and how it relates to the real world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about seeing beyond the numbers and using them to make smarter decisions.
Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey with standard deviation, exploring what it is, how it's calculated, and even when a high standard deviation can actually be a good thing.
It's been a deep dive indeed, and I think we're ready to wrap things up with some final thoughts about how to really use this concept effectively.
You know, it's funny. We started out talking about standard deviation as a way to measure variability.
Right.
But as we've been talking, I've also been thinking about the importance of embracing variability itself.
That's such an insightful connection. We often strive for consistency and predictability, but sometimes the most interesting things happen when we step outside of those comfort zones.
Exactly. Like, think about all the amazing innovations that have come from people who dared to be different, to challenge the status quo. Those ideas might have had a high standard deviation in the world of conventional thinking.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to remember that standard deviation is a tool, not a rule book. It can help us understand and navigate uncertainty, but it shouldn't limit our thinking or our willingness to explore new possibilities.
That's such a great point. It's like standard deviation can help us assess risk, but it shouldn't make us risk averse. Sometimes the greatest rewards come from taking a chance on something that might seem a little out there.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about finding that balance between understanding the potential for variation and being open to the unexpected.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for standard deviation. Not just as a statistical concept, but also as a metaphor for how we approach life in general.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring the world of data and statistics. You never know what insights you might uncover. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.